They had a certain something.
Mickey would talk about it all the time. I'm going to be a rock star. I'm going to be somebody.
Tommy would play the drums 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
When he got on his drum set, it was like electricity.
When Vince was on stage, he was a very different person. The girls loved him.
Mick didn't have a dime to his name, but once I heard him play, just turn out the lights. This guy's just got it.
They chased one goal relentlessly.
They wanted to be the biggest band in the world, and they knew they could do it.
Through struggles,
Mickey just could not keep a beat.
He wasn't a musician.
They had no food.
They were just living off of whoever will help them out at the time.
and setbacks.
Bob Krasnow said Elektra is not really interested in selling music to people who live in the gutter.
They were just a joke.
Some people are just driven. Four rebellious rockers' defiant pursuit of superstardom.
Nikki Sixx had a plan for world domination.
They weren't going to give up until they got what they wanted. What they wanted was Hollywood by the balls.
Never before seen images, stories, and revelations from the people who know what really happened.
There's girls everywhere, wall-to-wall girls.
Because they lived it with them.
They'd come into the studio and they'd be doing drugs. We couldn't take 5 years to turn this into something, or this organism would destroy itself.
You just couldn't help but say to yourself that these guys are either going to fall flat on their face or they're going to go right to the top.
This is Driven Mötley Crüe.
Frank was born December 11th, 1958.
We call him Nicky now. As a kid, we called him Frank, among other things. When Frank was born, his mother was 17.
She was beautiful. She was striking, and she was very charming. She really tried to do the right things, but as fate would have it, every time she turned around, she made a mistake with this, or made a mistake with that, or a misjudgment on people.
When Frank's father and mother split the sheets with each other, it caused so much hard feelings between them that Frank suffered for it.
My mom was dealing with quite a bit. We had hard times. It was the sole income. She didn't have anybody else to take care of us. And she was also very wild. She liked to party.
One time, his mother had took off and went with a truck driver, and she had left him with some woman in Sparks, Nevada. She called his grandmother and I. We picked him up and brought him home with us. When his mom would leave him, he'd never talk about it, except when Mom had to go someplace.
We lived in El Paso. We spent at least a year together there with my grandfather and my grandmother and my mom.
We had a hog ranch down in Texas. When Frank was a little boy, he had to fight his way through school. The big kids had grabbed him and take his money, and one time he loaded a lunchbox full of rock, and when the kid come up after him, Frank just hauled off and batted him with it, and no more problem from then on. We let him get independent for himself. It's the only thing I could do.
My mom and I moved to Seattle when I was probably about 3. Because of my mom's wildness, my grandparents felt that it was best if they took Frank and raised him, at least for a little while.
Frank was kind of brought up like a gypsy because I moved from job to job for a while. We had the kid with us down in Texas, New Mexico, Lake Tahoe, and Jerome, Idaho. It's a hard life on him.
He got sick of being told what to do.
Frank was having trouble in school a little bit, and it upset me.
I think a lot of Frank's attitude came from being kind of exported.
Frank come to the conclusion that small town was too small. He decided that he'd go back and live with his mother. So his grandmother sent him to Seattle.
Frank came to Roosevelt High School in 10th grade.
When I first met him, he was hitting on my girlfriend.
He was a Peter Frampton lookalike. He had a long shag haircut.
He was really hot. He had like the sandy brown skin and he was real tan, and he had these eyes that were just captivating.
He looked like a rocker kind of guy.
It was fairly obvious that we were the rock and rollers, and I think he really clicked on that.
We had long hair and we dressed pretty flashy.
We were really into a lot of glamour rock.
Alice Cooper, David Bowie.
We were
the loudest, hardest rocking band in high school.
I invited him to the house after school to hear the band practice. We had a stage set up in my basement, and we would actually get all dressed up with the satin shirts, and we would walk out there under the lights like it was, the big concert.
As soon as he saw us play, light bulbs went off in his head.
Frank didn't play a note, but he really had the drive.
He bugged Rick, show me how to play.
I started teaching him some things. Somehow or another, I gave him the impression that if he could just get a bass, he could be in the band. One day, Frank walks in a music store down in the University District with an empty guitar case.
And asked for an application. When the guy turned around and went to the back room, Frank very calmly just opened up the guitar case, sticks the guitar in there, closes the case, and then waits. Instead of running out the store, he just stands there. And this person goes back, gives him the application, he says, thanks, no problem.
He comes to the door, and he's all flushed, and he's breathing hard, and look what I got. And he opens it up, and I look at it, and I just can't believe what I'm looking at. And I just said, this is a guitar. This is not a bass.
Even though I was just the stupid drummer, I knew the difference between a Les Paul and a bass.
And the look on his face was just of disappointment and despair. What?
Frank wanted to be in the band, and desperate times call for desperate measures.
We began to find out that Frank was having a lot of trouble at home. I can remember a time when his mom was shouting obscenities behind him. Not real pleasant environment that he was coming from.
I knew he was having fights with his mom quite a bit.
Frank seemed to think that his mom hated him.
He was in those teenage years, growing up and discovering himself. You could tell he was just kind of agitated a lot.
He started to do some drugs.
When Frank and I went out to drink and to party, it was to excess.
You were smoking dope or you were drinking MD-20.
There was a big blow up between him and my mom, and there was just no resolving it. He was not doing well in high school.
By the middle of 11th grade, Frank dropped out altogether.
It got really bad. My mom and him had a talk, and the next thing I know, he went to Idaho.
When Frank came from Seattle to Jerome, he was a different person. He had an axe to grind with the world at that time.
He was talking about what it was like to take acid. It was hard to connect with Frank.
Frank always said that I'm going to be a rock musician if it kills me.
Something inside was telling him to go for his dream.
Between that and partying, that's all he thought about.
He decided to leave.
He had his mind made up and went to Los Angeles to become a rock star.
What a glorious time it was in the late 70s when the Sunset Strip was like the gold rush.
There was just sex everywhere, and there was drugs everywhere.
Frank was living from hand to mouth and sleeping in cars or wherever he could.
We called him up and I'm like, hey Frank, how the hell are you doing, man? What the hell's going on? And he stopped and he goes, Sam, I'm only going to tell you this once. Frank Farana is dead. I don't want to be called that. Don't call me that anymore. My name is Nikki Sixx now.
He was adamant. I am not Frank Farana. I am Nikki Sixx, and that's what you need to call me.
He wanted to really erase his past.
The name change was a big part of Frank's metamorphosis. He killed off Frank Farana and rebuilt himself from scratch.
Frank Farana, he couldn't steal a break. Nikki Sixx, that's altogether different.
The first time I ever saw Nikki, we were playing the Whiskey A Go-Go, and I was in an all-girl band. You couldn't miss him walking through the door. This hair that just was huge.
He was already dressed for MTV before there was an MTV.
Nikki had the dream of being a rock star. It wasn't like he was driven to learn his instrument. It was a prop. You know, the only thing with that prop, you do have to play a little bit.
This guy didn't even know what a E chord was.
Nikki learned how to be a better musician from our drummer, Lori Bell. They used to practice together. She would just get so furious with him. She'd be slapping her legs really hard, and Nikki just could not keep a beat.
When I first met Nikki Sixx, I was a street kid living in Hollywood. There was just this chemistry. I liked him immediately. I said, let's you and me start a band. And he was really happy. Like, he hugged me and was just like, yeah, let's do it, man. And so that was it.
London was fronted by Nigel Benjamin, the former lead singer of the very last incarnation of Mott the Hoople. Nikki Sixx was the bass player and in many ways the architect of the whole London theme.
We were going to try to perpetuate the classic glitter rock of 74, 75, kind of glitzy, glam, ambisexual, whatever you want to call it. The whole scene in Hollywood at that exact moment was almost permeated with punk rock. Those people wanted no part of it. London would play a sold-out weekend at the Starwood, and then we'd go down there to get paid on Sunday. Nikki had to walk through an entire crowd of wrathful punks, you know, who did not like the way he looked.
The crowd of people, they were laughing at him like, oh my God, take a look at these freaks.
And he got spit on like 100 times.
They were just a joke.
We'd play shows, and Nigel would come backstage and go, that guy sucks, he can't play, I want him out of the band.
Nikki was not a strong musician. Nikki was all over the place.
There was just a lot of turmoil within that group.
Nigel had an extremely huge ego. He goes, it's Nikki or me. And I said, no way, Nikki's not going anywhere. Nigel Benjamin quit the band. The magic was gone.
Nikki said, I want something bigger, I want to shock people, I want to get out there and I want to be known.
One day I'm sitting with Nikki, we're out in my car, and Nikki started crying. And I go, what's the matter? And he goes, this makes me sad to think about it. He was, hold on a second. He started crying because he was quitting the band, and I didn't know that, you know.
Nikki wanted to put together 3 other guys that he had handpicked to be in a star band.
Nikki Sixx was a rock and roll architect, out to build the ultimate heavy metal beast.
Nikki hooked up with Tommy Lee.
He knew Tommy from Sweet 19.
Tommy was very young at the time, I think still in high school.
Nikki definitely got the best drummer around at that time.
Tommy was born in Athens and October 3rd, 1962. Tommy was 2 when my mom brought him back to the United States.
Growing up, he was a great all-American kid.
Tommy's relationship with his parents was very good.
You could tell it was a tight-knit family and everybody supported everybody.
My parents were pretty Leave It to Beaver.
Tommy had a lot of energy. He was very hyperactive. He loved music.
Tommy was banging on the stuff in the kitchen. He was playing on the walls. My father bought him a drum set for Christmas from Sears. And the front was all psychedelic, and there was a light inside the kick drum that blinked on and off, and he just thought that was the coolest thing alive. I remember when Tommy first got into ballet and tap class. Tommy had to come with me to class. Instead of him just sitting and watching the whole time, my mom was like, while you're here, you might as well try it, right? So he kind of got into it. They used to call him the 2x4 because he was like really stiff, you know?
I remember one time coming over to his house and he's in a pair of tights. And I'm like, Tom, why are you wearing the tights?
If I was ever mad at him or something, I'd go right in the middle of the street and I'd just go, hey, Tommy, it's time for ballet!
He was kind of embarrassed about it.
I met Tom at Royal Oak High School.
Tommy was a skinny little guy, long hair, and kind of tall and lanky.
It was tough for him because he wasn't quite cool yet. He didn't really know where he was fitting.
Tommy got hassled a lot just for looking different and being different.